during the whole of a dull, dark, and soundless day in the autumn of the year, when the clouds hung oppressively low in the heavens, I had been passing alone on horseback through a singularly dreary tract of country, and at length found myself, as the shades of evening drew on, within view of the melancholy House of Usher. I know not how it was, but with the first glimpse of the building, a sense of insufferable gloom pervaded my spirit. I looked upon the scene before me, upon the mere house, upon the bleak walls, upon the vacant, eye-like windows, upon a few rank sedges, and upon the white trunks of decayed trees. With an utter depression of soul, there was an iciness, a sinking, a sickening of the heart. What was it that so unnerved me in the contemplation of the House of Usher? I reined my horse to the precipitous brink of a black and lurid tarn, and gazed down into its still waters. But the reflection only deepened the dread already upon me. I had received a letter from Roderick Usher, a wildly earnest letter that gave evidence of an excited mental state, and that requested my company. He was my closest boyhood companion, though our intercourse had been infrequent. He wrote of a bodily illness, of a mental disorder that oppressed him, and of an earnest desire to see me as his best and indeed his only friend. The valet ushered me through dark passages and into the study where Roderick sat. Surely no man had ever before so terribly altered as my friend. The cadaverousness of his complexion, the luminous eyes, the lips pale as marble, the ghastly pallor of his skin, and the miraculous luster of his hair. These features were unsettling. His voice varied rapidly from a tremulous indecision to that abrupt, weighty utterance of the lost drunkard. He suffered, he told me, from a constitutional and family evil, a morbid acuteness of the senses, an acute nervousness. Light oppressed him. Sounds, even from stringed instruments, were unbearable. He feared the future, and feared his own fear. The brother had spoken of his sister with such a broken utterance that I listened with no little wonder. She had been his sole companion for long years, his last and only relative on earth. Her malady, long baffling the skill of her physicians, was a settled apathy, a gradual wasting away of the person, and frequent but transient episodes of a partially cataleptical character. As Roderick spoke, the Lady Madeline herself passed through a remote portion of the apartment and disappeared without having noticed my presence. I regarded her with utter astonishment, mingled with dread. A sensation of stupor oppressed me as my eyes followed her retreating figure. When at last she had gone, I turned to Usher and sought to read his countenance. He had buried his face in his hands, and I could perceive only that a far more than ordinary paleness overspread the emaciated fingers, through which trickled many passionate tears. Usher informed me that Madeline's illness had long resisted treatment, and that on the evening of my arrival she had taken finally to her bed, never to rise again. Several days passed, and at length Roderick informed me that the Lady Madeline was no more. He declared his intention to preserve her corpse for a fortnight in one of the numerous vaults within the main walls of the building. He cited fears of the intrusive curiosity of her physicians as the reason for this singular proceeding. I assisted him in the temporary entombment. The vault in which we placed her lay at great depth, immediately beneath that portion of the building in which was my own sleeping apartment. Its walls were of solid copper, and the door was massive iron. We screwed down the lid of the coffin and bore it to its rest. Having looked upon her pale face in the coffin, I observed that it bore a striking similitude to her brother's features. Usher murmured a few words from which I learned they had been twins, and that sympathies of a scarcely intelligible nature had always existed between them. We replaced and screwed the door and made our way upward into the scarcely less gloomy apartments above. An observable change came over the features of the mental disorder of my friend. His ordinary manner had vanished. He roamed from chamber to chamber with hurried, unequal, and objectless steps. There were times when I thought his unceasingly agitated mind labored with an oppressive secret which he struggled to divulge. At times I was compelled to resolve all into the mere inexplicable vagaries of madness, for I beheld him gazing upon vacancy for long hours in an attitude of the profoundest attention, as if listening to imaginary sounds. It was no wonder that his condition terrified me, yet I struggled to reason away these fancies. One evening, having informed me abruptly that the Lady Madeline was no longer among the living, his demeanor grew wild with terror. He told me in low murmurs that he heard sounds below, movements, and then he buried his face in his hands and wept. I could not but admit that I, too, had heard them, yet endeavored to calm him, attributing all to the wild influenza of the storm then raging without. It was a tempestuous and strange night. The wind was rushing in hurried gusts around the mansion. I took up a volume and read aloud to Usher, endeavoring to soothe his agitation. As I proceeded through the tale, a distant, hollow, metallic clangor reached my ears. I paid it no attention, yet the passage before me described sounds that corresponded, moment by moment, to the very sounds arising from below. A creaking and grating shriek broke distinctly upon the silence of the night, and Usher sprang to his feet and began to pace furiously about the room. His lips quivered as if in inaudible murmur. Then he spoke, shrieked in a low, hurried, gibbering voice, as if unconscious of my presence. He declared that he had long heard these sounds, that for many days he had known that she still lived, that they had placed her living in the tomb. He raved that she now stood behind the door. As Usher uttered these words, the massive iron door swung back, and the lofty and enshrouded figure of the Lady Madeline appeared upon the threshold. There was blood upon her white robes, and the evidence of some bitter struggle upon every portion of her frame. For a moment, she remained trembling and reeling upon the threshold. Then, with a low, moaning cry, she fell heavily inward upon the person of her brother. Beneath the weight of that final agony, Roderick Usher fell to the floor, a corpse, a victim to the terrors he had anticipated. From that chamber and from that mansion I fled aghast. The storm was still abroad in all its wrath. Suddenly there shot along the path a wild light, and I turned to see whence so strange a gleam could have issued. The radiance was that of the full setting, blood-red moon, which now shone vividly through that once barely discernible fissure, that crack which extended from the roof of the building in a zigzag direction to the base. While I gazed, the fissure rapidly widened, and the mighty walls came rushing asunder. The deep and dank tarn closed sullenly and silently over the fragments of the House of Usher,